So which are the strongest detachments for every single faction in Warhammer 40k by the numbers? Let's talk through the most powerful detachment per army, how they're performing, and what makes them good on the tabletop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking armies and detachments, going through every single faction in the game right now, and take a look at the detachments that seem to be giving them the most success on the tabletop, at least in terms of numbers and data. 10th edition 40k certainly changed up the theme on sub-factions within the game. Rather than necessarily having named regiments, chapters or craft worlds or anything like that, you now have a theme around a certain force. The idea being that Games Workshop's trying to push you to do different army archetypes and different detachments. Sometimes they're quite well balanced within an army, sometimes one or two tend to dominate and be just better than the rest. In this video, let's go through each faction in the game, talk through the detachments, going by things like win rate, amount of event wins in the last balance update, and how many people are choosing to play them as metrics for judging the best. All the data coming from the various places that collect 40k stats. I'll leave the links to several sources down in the video description. I had a look at things from Goonhammer, Meta Monday, Stats Hotbar and StatJack 40k for this. In any case, let's jump right into it though, starting with the Imperium and then going through to Chaos and Xenos. First up, for the Imperium, we have the Space Marines. The poster boys of Warhammer 40k seem to be doing best with the Gladius Task Force right now. Their previous index detachment, which has been generally either top or joint top for quite some time. The tournament stats still aren't awesome though. Win rates are around about 44 to 45%, and just the one big tournament victory during the last balance pass, at least for core Space Marines anyway. Kind of weird that the Black Templars have already had two with it. Gladius does tend to be a really quite general purpose one that allows you to just use the majority of the units in the Space Marine Codex. The core rule gives you 3 turns worth of movement buffs in the combat doctrines, advance and shoot, advance and charge, and fallback shoot and charge, and being able to flex into those with a 1 command point is pretty great. It perhaps does particularly well to support assault elements of Space Marine armies. The advance and charge is really big for that, and it also has fights on death, a rather nice lance melee stratagem that can give some AP as well. And reactive moves are rather helpful for any sort of elite infantry. Storm of Fire can still be nice for supporting range though, and Armour of Contempt can worsen enemy AP. For the enhancements, the Armour Indomitus is pretty standout. It weirdly enough often gets played on a lone Gravis captain these days, giving a nice big feel no pain and a high save on top of his invulnerable save and damage negation. Out of the others, maybe the Honour Vehement is quite a nice one, just a good melee boost that gets better in the assault doctrine. For Space Marines, there's plenty of other competition for decent enough detachments though. In terms of regular play at tournaments, Ironstorm, Vanguard, Firestorm and Stormlance are all pretty fine. Most of them also on win rates are around about 44% or so. Ironstorm does well for tanks, Vanguard for sneaky Phobos, and Inceptors deep striking everywhere. Firestorm's nice for close range shooting, and it's just quite a fun one and easy to use, though it doesn't generally tend to be at the absolute top of the tree for performance. And then Stormlance Task Force only has a few things for more general purpose Space Marines, but tends to be one of the ones that does better at a sort of top tournament performance sort of rate, more so than casually. Looks like there's been 2 tournament victories with that, and some fairly good win rates in the last balance update. For the average Space Marine list though, particularly with some melee, Gladius is hard to beat. Next up, we've got the forces of the Imperial Guard, and for the majority of players it's a 2-horse race between the Combined Arms Regiment or the Hammer of the Emperor. Though a few talented players have been managing to make board control lists work with recon element with a massive infantry. I feel like if you're going for one of the more played ones, then it's probably Combined Arms Regiment over Hammer of the Emperor, at least by the numbers right now, though you definitely could make a case for recon. Combined Arms is the updated index version once again. Win rates are around about 46 to 47%. Easily the most played, around about double the amount of Hammer of the Emperor, and having 3 event victories since the last balance update. The core rule gives you lethal hits for regiment and squadron keyword units against their respective targets. Nice enough for Kazakin making an impact, or Lehman Russes or Dawns with multi-melter sponsons being able to take down tough stuff far more easily. The stratagems, there's loads of ways to get additional orders, but perhaps some more standout things, Fields of Fire can add extra AP to a couple of units in a pinch, and reinforcements can allow you to recycle some Kazakin, Scions, or a big block of infantry. Maybe for the most notable enhancement, there's Grand Strategist, just getting you a nice straightforward extra order, and that could be nice on a Dawn commander. Overall, it does a good job of supporting balanced guard, and does seem to be getting some tournament victories to show that it can compete at the highest level. Otherwise, for recent stats, Hammer of the Emperor has a similar sort of win rate, though about half the play rate and just the 1 event victory. This will give you swift moving tank, Kazakin that can move fast and advance and drop, and really good support for Rogue or Dawn commanders in particular. The enhancements can be good for those. And then Recon Element is kind of interesting in that it's far lesser played, but the few people playing it seem to be doing well, win rates of around about 50% or so, and no less than 3 tournament victories since the balance pass. This is the one that just gives your guard infantry lots of annoying ways to try and keep them alive, and you can potentially have a big board control list, still potentially backed up by some meaty damage from some tanks and things if you want. Overall, at least by the numbers, if you have the models for a recon list and you know the game really well and are playing at a tournament level, it's probably got the good arguments to be the top one, though otherwise for the average player it's probably combined arms. Next up, we've got the Adepta Sororitas, and again this is going to be a 2 detachment race, either Hallowed Martyrs or the Champions of Faith, both of which seem to have pretty similar competitive play rates and pretty similar win rates as well, somewhere between 52 and 54%. For actually succeeding at the higher end level of the game though, it really seems to be very skewed in favour of Hallowed Martyrs. Champions of Faith doesn't seem to have won any big grand tournaments, whereas the Hallowed Martyrs have managed to win 7 of them. For the Martyrs detachment, already themed around the Order of Our Martyr Lady and the sisters sacrificing themselves for the Emperor, that one gives you some damage buffs for depleted units, which is handy enough as it happens, though could be a bit of a side benefit. Maybe more notably, their stratagems to resurrect characters when they die, really quite nice, and you can field lots of individual characters in this one, and you can have some really nice melee manipulation with forcing enemies to attack just the one unit. You could have individual lone characters force opponents to put all their melee into that one squad, while your other sisters hit them hard. For enhancements, it's got the powerful damage buff of Through Suffering Sacrifice, a very easy include on a Palatine to put down a surprising amount of hurt. A Saintly example is quite a nice throwaway one, where you could have a character that can farm some miracle dice on death. Overall, it's pretty awesome for supporting the cast of characters that the sisters have, and particularly so for Morven Val as well, who'll really enjoy reviving on death and bringing the pain again. Champions of Faith seem to be doing pretty equally well in terms of win rate though. They're the ones that enhance a few units of either Paragon Warsuits or Celestian Sacrosants. It became such a better detachment after it didn't need Miracle Dice to be burnt every turn just to activate those units. It's got quite a nice support roster of stratagems there with a few good damage dealers. Either way, those two just seem to be far ahead of all the rest. Maybe Bringers of Flame and Army of Faith not doing terribly on around about 45% wins or so, but they're played far less. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor and Tabletop Stronghold, who wanted to share their range of magnetic carry cases to get your armies from A to B in safety. They're made by Sam, based in the USA and West Virginia, and they've got a code at the moment for 25% off for AT25, which you can use to get them at a discount between their regular sales. Magnetic storage has certainly taken off as the way to transport models in 40k over the last 10 years or so. The idea being to put small magnets on the bases of your models so they can attach to magnetic surfaces, so you can fit loads of models all in one small space without the need for insulating foam and without worrying about them bashing and rubbing on each other. Tabletop Stronghold's mag cases are designed to be a purpose-built version of this, a really notably sturdy and hard to damage MDF box on the outside, and then multiple layers worth of steel trays on the inside, and you can raise and lower those depending on the height of the miniatures that you want to store. On the front goes a nice acrylic sheet, so you can basically see all the miniatures while they're in storage and in transit. Pretty nice to have your handiwork on display. Broadly speaking, reviews of these have tended to be pretty positive where I've seen them about on Reddit and down in the YouTube comments. And they also have a competitive terrain set option as well for another MDF thing. These are a little cheaper if you buy a mag case alongside. In any case, check them out, links down in the video description. A big thank you to them for sponsoring this one, and I'll cycle back to them at the end of the video to talk through their specific mag case offerings for those interested. Next up, we've got the Guardians of the Emperor with the Adeptus Custodes, and the winner here is still the Lions of the Emperor. Win rates both in tournament and casual games are around about 49%. It's easily the most dominating and most well-played detachment, around about triple the play rate of Shield Host, which also seems to have far lower win rates as well, and also is the one that seems to have won the most tournaments as well, with 4 event victories since the balance pass. The core rule for this one's just very directly helpful, giving you a +1 to wound for your chunky Custodes units when they're fighting in isolation. It just makes them utterly general purpose and lethal with those Guardian Spears that are already nice with lethal hits and a mid-strength profile. And it's not really the most onerous requirement in the world, with Custodes often having big chunky units fighting by themselves anyway. Beyond that, they've got good stratagems for supporting Custodes broadly in the midboard, a reactive move when they're shot, a fallback shoot and charge is really handy. You can use a once per game ability twice, which is quite nice with Trajan Valoris with his big moment shackle and loads of attacks. And it's quite a fun one to split the Alaris Custodian unit up, which means that you could have one big unit turn into a whole bunch of small deep striker units essentially, which could warp around the board to do some secondary objectives. They've got some good enhancements for shield captains on top of that, add Mora Mortis for a really big damage boost, getting damage 3 is really nice, superior creation for a tougher one, and a fun lone operative one too. Beyond that, they've got really quite good support for the standard Custodes that want to be fighting in the midboard. Wardens with Blade Champions may be backed up by some Alaris, maybe a Kyriadraxus guard squad, and perhaps some Caladius tanks hovering in the backfield, as then they're able to provide some support to units out there without getting close. Otherwise, by the numbers, if I had to give a runner-up, it might be the Solar Spearhead rather than a Shield Host. Shield Host is the second most played, but doesn't seem to be performing quite so well. So the Spearhead is the one that supports the Custodes Dreadnoughts, with lots of extra movement and OC and damage buffs and things. It's really nice for the Telemon. Looks like the win rates are pretty similar to the lines of the Emperor, though no event wins and far less data. Otherwise, Shield Host is still very usable with its damage buffs, and Talons of the Emperor also sees some play as well. For the Cyborgized Warriors of the Admech, again there's 2 detachments and rated at least fairly evenly. The Skitarii Hunter Cohort and Halo Screed Battleclade both having at least somewhat similar performance, though the Halo Screed has played about twice the amount of Hunter Cohort. Its rules support a lot more of the roster, and maybe tend to be a bit more on the fun side as opposed to board control style things. Both of them seem to be doing well. Maybe the Skitarii Hunter Cohort just a little bit ahead in the data, though there's really not loads of data given that it's Admech and they have kind of low play rates. For the Hunter Cohort, they've got around about 52% wins in tournament games, which is fairly impressive, though casual win rate's a bit lower at 47%. It's played around about half the amount of the Halo Screed detachment, and has 2 event victories to the 1 of the Halo Screed so far. The core rule for this one gives you stealth for Skitarii and the benefit of cover for Sicarians, and then some good stratagems that can support their mechanical warriors, a 5+ feel no pain to make a unit hard to destroy, advance and charge which can be nice for Ruststalkers or Dragoons and things, return to reserves can be nice for Taraxi jumping up and down the board doing secondaries, or perhaps move blocking things, and you can turn off shooting to one unit that's greater than 18 inches away, which can be pretty disruptive, keeping an important squad alive when otherwise they might have died. The enhancements here are pretty good as well. They've got reactive moves, infiltrating and manipulating the Doctriners for units nearby, or very good for Skitarii Marshals in their troop squads. Overall, between all that, you tend to have quite a lot of Skitarii on the board, all with good invulnerable saves and are harder to kill than you might expect. They still have plenty of damage, but might be a little bit more skewed towards board control style things compared with Halo Screed perhaps. Talking of which, it seems that one's currently got lower win rates in tournament games, though higher win rates casually, and the casual games do have more data. It is more played, though it's only had the 1 event victory so far. For Halo Screed, you get to choose Halo Override units to get one of several buffs that can be Advance and Charge or several others, and the stratagems can support things like Cataphron Servitors and Castellan robots as well as the Skitarii. It has a 5+1/2 critical hit, which is quite nice for lethal hits in some breaches. You can reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of 1 for Halo Override units, which is quite a nice general purpose damage buff, and there's a good reactive move one. For enhancements, you can make a Castellan unit, a permanent Halo unit. There's a +6 inch range one, which is pretty nice for getting breaches in range of their targets, and doubling up the stats rules of the Doctriners is quite a powerful one too. Overall, some good draw to both lists at the moment. Seems that maybe the Hunter Cohort has recently been having a bit more success in tournament games, though I feel like with low data there could be a bit of an attribution to chance with that. For the Grey Knights, it's very early days after their codex so far, though it does seem that most interest has been around the Warpbane Task Force and the Banishers detachment. At least on the first tournament weekend, they both seem to have had fairly similar play rates and win rates, though the data is absolutely tiny. So if one of them emerges to be more obviously better than the other, it's maybe hard to say by the numbers at this point. Warpbane Task Force certainly seems like it's in a good position to do well. That's the Purifier focus one where you have zones of control, big damage rerolls within those zones, and some decent enough stratagems with extra damage for Purifiers, or potentially allowing a close deep strike if you can combo it with the zone of control. Given Purifiers being quite so powerful with their damage buff rules, it seems pretty easy to believe that one's still going to do very well. From the Codex detachments, the Banishers has had the most interest. Several of the stratagems I'd say really aren't that good, but you do have easy access to lethal hits melee if you can pass your psychic tests. Advance and Charge for a stratagem is really nice to get it there, and they have the fairly godly stratagem of the Mist of Deimos reimagined, the one where you can be phasing units back into reserves when the enemy moves around near you. If I had to guess, I'd suspect that the Warpbane Task Force will wind up being on top. I guess we'll have to wait and see though. The other interesting ones to me felt like the Brotherhood Strike and Sanctic Spearhead, between their easy rerolls from reserves and shenanigans, and the good support for Dread Knights, which is still really important as the main way to deal with heavies. For the Imperial Agents, it feels like their internal balance for detachments is about as bad as their external balance versus the rest of 40k. The Imperialis Fleet one is the only one that supports the majority of their limited roster, but even then it isn't exactly great news for them. Their win rates are in the low 40s, the play rate for Imperial Agents in general is near non-existent in competitive games, and even casually, the other detachments that aren't Imperialis fleets basically are played around about a tenth as much as the main one. They haven't had any event victories since the balance pass, though I did see that someone went 5-1 with the detachments the other weekend, which was fun. Every so often people do manage to have a bit of success with them, usually as board control style things, though I think the one last weekend was Canis Rex and a bunch of Deathwatch. The core rule for the detachment gives you a +1 to hit one focal unit, or +1 OC and a 5+ invulnerable if you hold one objective, at least fairly directly helpful to plenty of units in the army. Otherwise, the strength of the detachment is in a bunch of interesting board control style things. A reactive move when shot can get a unit to safety, and it can infiltrate units or deep strike Voidfarer ones, and there's a couple of damage dealer stratagems that could help you assail an objective. I've more commonly seen it used with multiple expendable waves of chaff, playing intelligently and scoring points, things like subductors, transports, Kyriodraxus for lone operative, some units infiltrating and deep striking, maybe some navy breaches, and perhaps some Deathwatch to do some counter-attacking. As ever though, the Imperial Agents in general could use some help, particularly a faction rule and some way to take down tough stuff, maybe being the first thing on the wish list. Next up we have the recently nerfed Imperial Knights, and they're one of the few armies that doesn't have a codex at the moment, so it's literally just a competition between that and the Questor Forge Pact, the sort of allied AdMech one, where several of the stratagems and options just don't really seem worth the setup. Imperial Knights have just had some points increases, though up to this point they've been pretty dominant. Win rates are around about 59%. The Grotmus detachment near enough unplayed in competitive games. It looks like only around about 3% of people have been experimenting with that casually as well. They've just won a ridiculous amount of tournament victories, around about 18 with the Noble Lance. The core rule for the detachment gives you a 6+ feel no pain, boosted to a 5+ when they're honoured. It has rotate ion shields, a fight on death one, and a +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles. And for popular enhancements, there's a sticky objectives one, which is always big for big stompy walkers. A mysterious guardian is rather good as well, allowing a knight to fade away and pop up with a perfect line of sight. The support certainly seems nice enough. Extra defense is often one of the biggest things for knights, given that they tend to be exposed and taking damage. Lots of their strength does just feel like it's come from the faction datasheet rules though, at least at the previous points cost that they were before any nerfs. They're certainly not going to have any rivalry for top detachment until the codex comes out though. Finally, for the Imperium, we've got the Divergent Chapter Space Marines, and for the Blood Angels, despite the Liberator Assault group being far more played, I'd probably both rate that and the Angelic Inheritors at least fairly even. It seems like for tournament performance, both of them have been doing well. The Liberator Assault group is the far more popular one, around about triple the play rate of the Angelic Inheritors. A solid enough mid-tier win rate, around 49%, though it has been doing well enough for the event victories, and certainly seems to be doing as well as the Inheritors there, at 7 tournament trophies taken. The Liberator Assault group is the fairly straightforward and brutal one to use. +2 strength and +1 attack on the charge is enormous for Marine melee. Very nasty with both the Blood Angels unique units and any skirmishing or chainsaw toting things that the other Space Marines can bring to bear, and then have some fairly easy access to speed and damage. Advance and charge is great, fallback and charge can be very useful as well. Red Rampage can give you a massive damage boost, and for their enhancements they have some pretty interesting ones, including a fights first once per game and a sustained hits 3 once per game, which can be pretty brutal when combined with a captain on the turn where he goes +3 attacks and devastating wounds. Overall feels hard to go wrong with just about any combination of Space Marine melee, though still is often backed up by some big guns. The Angelic Inheritors on the other hand seems to be if anything more impressive on the win rates. Tournament wins around 54%, more casual ones around 51%. Lesser plays and proportionately less event victories. Looks like they've taken down 2 tournaments. This one's all about the Blood Angels leader characters. You get to reroll ones to hit and wound for units that have characters in them, and then choosing one of 2 mobility rules on top of that. And otherwise they've got some stratagems for return to reserves, turning off shooting at greater than 18 inches, a lance and lethal hits one, and some other character buffs. For enhancements, you can scout one unit forward 6 inches, and there's a revive on death one if you are planning on playing very aggressively with a captain or something. If playing this one, there's a good chance that you'd be going heavy on the jump captains, maybe with Sanguinary Guard, likely Dante in a big unit. There are lots of other good punchy character options in the Space Marines and Blood Angels rosters, of course. For the Black Templars, like the Grey Knights, it's really quite early days in terms of tournament data, though at least for their strongest detachment in game, it does seem like it's pretty clearly the Gladius. Pretty much all of the high placing lists from the first tournament weekend were using the Gladius task force, including the 2 Black Templar armies that won tournaments on their first weekend too. It certainly doesn't feel ideal not to have one of their named themed ones being the best way to play them, and I feel like it's more of a case of Games Workshop having written their unique ones kind of weak. Several of their rules are just a bit underwhelming or keyword locked, so it means that Gladius Task Force has a lot better support for the melee things they want to do. Advancing and charging, fighting on death, maybe extra AP from the Lance stratagem, and reactive moves. All of those are good things to support some elite Templars skirmishing with the enemy and cutting down the enemy with some mastercrafted power swords. The Armor Indomitus or the Honor Vehement could both be good for the Emperor's Champion as well. Some people have been using either one of those. Beyond that, most of their unique detachments have been at least seeing some people play an experiment with them. Wrathful Procession, Companions of Vehemence, and the Godhammer Force. All of them do have genuinely interesting stuff. It just doesn't feel like they've got as much interesting or useful stuff to deliver the Crusade to its targets compared with the Gladius though. For the Space Wolves, the most popular one is the Saga of the Beastslayer, though it does look like for the Sons of Fenris playing Gladius Task Force or Stormlance Task Force, both of those are doing fine as well. For tournament performance, it looks like the Space Wolves haven't been having a lot of success at the top tables. No big event wins for the faction at all, despite some good win rates and tons of 4-on-1 results. And then the three detachments all seem to be really quite similar on both the tournament and casual win rates, around about the sort of 50 to 52% sort of mark, though plenty more people are choosing to take the themed Saga of the Beastslayer. The Beastslayer's core rule certainly helps out a whole bunch of their elites. It gives you lethal hits versus characters, monsters and vehicles, so lots of big, tough and scary targets out there in Warhammer 40k. It gets better with the Saga, and then you've got lots of good stratagems to back that up. A return to reserves one, a reactive move one, and another nice easy damage increase with a +1 to wounds. All good things for supporting melee fighting elites, good for Thunderwolves and Wolfen and more. For the enhancements, maybe the most standout popular one is the one to allow a Wolfen unit to attach a Wolfguard battle leader, making that squad into just an extraordinarily dangerous and threatening one. Otherwise, both Gladius and Stormlance do well. Gladius for all the reasons that supports melee units before. Being able to advance and charge is quite a nice benefit, and then it's got some more flexible buffs beyond that. Stormlancers also seem to be doing pretty fine though. Advance and charge, big reactive moves, and then the Thunderwolves can use all the mounted keyword support, which is pretty great as they're a very strong datasheet. For the Deathwatch, they basically exclusively use their Black Spear Task Force. They only get their mission tactics that are on their datasheets if they're in here, and seems that the buffs and options provided by the Black Spear are just massively more valued for the Deathwatch kill team support, more so than Gladius or any of the rest. Deathwatch have been maybe having a bit more of a tough time in the previous Knights and Death Guard meta. Win rates are around about 45% and 2 tournament victories. Their Black Spear Force does give them a fair bit of good value though. The mission tactics for 2 turns worth of damage buffs, plus a precision thing, being able to flex into the sustained or lethal hits for a command point when they need to is nice enough too. And otherwise they've got the Teleportarium to repeatedly teleport units around the board when they need to, good for getting close range shooting where it needs to be. And then various flavours of special issue ammunition, which after the kill team updates they got when they got their digital index, they became far more interesting and efficient to put on squads. The enhancements are otherwise pretty standout as well. The Beacon Angelus to give you deep strike and free rapid ingress is a really nice combo. The Tome of Exoclades for multiple Oath of Moment buffs, and the Thief of Secrets is a really fighty relic that is pretty nice on either a Gravis Captain or Judas here. Getting extra strength and damage is a nice combo. Overall, lots of good value here. I do wonder whether Deathwatch might rise up a bit if Knights and Death Guard become a little less prevalent. Finally, for the Imperium, we've got the Dark Angels, where by far the most played detachment that they have is the Wrath of the Rock, the more recent digital one that came out alongside the Balance update, where they seem to have win rates around about the 46 to 47% mark in competitive games. It's absolutely dominant in terms of the one that most people play, a play rate around about 5 times the next detachment, so it is the one that most people have faith will do best for them. Though currently it hasn't had quite as much luck as some at the top of the tournaments. I don't think that anyone's won any grand tournaments with this one yet. It is at least a fairly easy detachment to get some value out of though. The -1 to wound for infantry and mounted against high strength attacks is really quite a big and meaningful defensive buff, particularly for Deathwing Knights, which are already pretty fearsome to take down even before that buff. And it does have some big high impact stratagems, redesignating the Oath of Moment target once you've killed the first one, a +2 strength at range which can be really quite punchy for Hellblasters, and a powerful countercharge in the enemy turn. They also have an advanced shoot and charge stratagem as well, which is pretty important for slightly slower moving Dark Angels on the board melee, really good for Inner Circle Companions and those Deathwing Knights once again. For enhancements, you can deep strike a Deathwing model first turn if you want to, though probably the best enhancement is Ancient Weapons. This one gives you a massive damage boost to one fighty character, +2 strength, extra AP and +1 damage. It's really quite a big all-rounder. Overall, between all that, it's solid support for the Dark Angel's most effective units. I would say maybe it does tend to be a detachment that's perhaps a little bit more effective for raw might, that might just tend to have a little bit more success in casual games compared with competitive, though obviously it's fine in both. Otherwise, for the Dark Angels, not that many other detachments are played that much. The Gladius and Stormlance both have kind of similar win rates, both also providing advance and charge. The Gladius some more general support, and then the Stormlance some good things for mounted units and a good reactive move stratagem. And then out of the other Dark Angels unique ones, it's probably the Company of Hunters, which is doing rather well. Very few people play the Ravenwing focused detachment, but those that do seem to be having at least a fairly good time of it. Win rates are over 50% of this one, both competitive and casually, and someone has managed to win 2 tournaments with them. It does feel like by the numbers that might have a good argument to be challenging for best detachment. They're kind of hard to say given so few people are playing it. I'm sure models are one factor, but the majority of people don't seem to think that that's going to give them a better chance of success than Wrath of the Rock. Moving on to the Heretics, and first up we have the Chaos Space Marines. Earlier on in 2025 it seemed that creations of Bile and Renegade Raiders were kind of level for detachment power rates. In more recent metas though, it seems that Renegade Raiders have really drawn ahead. Massively better performance at tournaments, win rates are around about 53% and doing pretty well casually. And for the tournaments won by Chaos Space Marines, it's almost entirely these guys. 5 tournament victories to the next closest with Pact-Bound Zealots, which is played just a little bit less. Renegade Raiders is a pretty good general purpose support package for the Chaos Marines. They get their ranged weapons the assault keyword, so you can advance and shoot, so some handy extra mobility for gun tanks and the like, and then you get extra AP both at range versus units on objective markers, really nice for legionary chainswords chosen with AP too, and things like the autocannons of Predator Destructors. The stratagems, again lots of nice staple ones. They've got advance and charge, which can be nice for units jumping out of a rhino. A big damage buff for some massive rerolls when you jump out of transports. That's really powerful when applied to Chosen, who can already advance and charge, and an Armour of Contempt equivalent. One of their best enhancements can also give a unit the Scout keyword as well, moving forward 6 inches to maybe get a scary melee combo ready to jump out of a rhino in the midboard. Chaos Bikers can get on quite well with this detachment too. Overall, between all that, it gives good support to Chaos Space Marine infantry melee combos. Most units will get at least something out of the detachment. Extra speed and damage tend to be hard to go wrong with though. Otherwise, and seeming in second place at the moment, we've got the Pact-Bound Zealots. They've got similar sort of casual win rates, though maybe a little bit lower in competitive games, around about 49%, and they have won at least 1 grand tournament. They've got lots of interesting interactions with their Marks of Chaos for some big core damage buffs, and Pact-Bound lists often tend to go kind of heavy on big combo shooting, things like Vindicators and Predator tanks with lots of massive damage output, maybe backed up by a Hellbrute or maybe even Abaddon if you're going all in. They can support melee things rather well though, with things like advance and charge and the sustained hits that Slaanesh can bring. Otherwise, for other rivals, maybe the Creations of Bile is probably next. It's the 3rd most played, though the win rates have dropped a fair bit, down to around about 46% in competitive games. They're the ones to go for melee rush Chaos Space Marines, often with lots of Possessed and Chosen, and Bile himself of course. I wonder whether or not that one might pick up a bit more now that there have been nerfs to Knights and Death Guard. Beyond that, several others see play, including the Vashtor themed one with all the demon engines, and Veterans of the Long War. Most of them have typically had less success though. Chaos Cult is often a bit of an anomaly, almost on plays, but for those that do it, it can do board control things really quite well at a high level, with lots of scary accursed cultists. For Death Guard, at time of recording, they've just had their big points updates, and that could well change the balance of the detachments. These numbers are from prior to the updates, though it did feel like Mortarian's Hammer lists might have got nerfed more than the rest. Pre-update though, I would have rated Mortarian's Hammer as the single strongest one, tournament win rates of 59% and casual win rates almost to match. It wasn't played quite as much as the Virulent Vectorium, though it seems to be winning the lion's share of big tournaments, no less than 18 event victories, which is kind of obscene and more than the rest of the detachments put together. This is the one that has the core rule to automatically mark units to be afflicted, which can be helpful for Demon Engine firepower, particularly Plague Burst Crawlers with their indirects, but also can synergize rather nastily with Death Shroud as well, meaning that they can do their close deep strike charges super easily, even into the backfield. I do kind of wonder whether that interaction is at risk of some sort of changes from balance passes in the future. The core mechanic has loads of strength just in itself, though these stratagems are helpful too. They provide some nice general purpose support for the demon engines, things like moving through terrain at the assault keyword, and -2 to charge them, and some damage rerolls against enemy units in their deployment zone. Particularly standout as well is their Tendril Submissions, an enhancement that allows a Lord of Virulence to be a lone operative and stand around marking targets for even more damage. That one did go up in the balance pass though. It feels like Mortarian's Hammer list did go up a bit more compared with the other Death Guard list though, so maybe the other two will gain some ground. The other ones that have been successful are the mainline Virulent Vectorium, the Balanced Plague Company one. That gives you sticky objectives, which is a pretty big one, a -1 damage stratagem, a 5+ Feel No Pain Demon Prince via an enhancement, and some big damage buffs for the Lord of Contagion. The win rates in competitive play are a little lower, though it's still got plenty of big tournament wins. And the third really popular and successful one is the Champions of Contagion. Massive win rates once again, both casual and competitive, plenty of event victories, and they have some big support and damage combos for leader units, both the Death Shrouds with the Lord of Contagion and particularly Plague Marine combos which won't hit as hard by the balance pass. I wouldn't really be too surprised if that gains ground on the other two. It at least feels like Death Guard detachments might have a bit more debate about them after the balance changes. The others are generally played far less than the rest, though given recent Death Guard strength, none of them have been doing particularly badly, and can add some genuinely interesting supports to other different aspects of the army. For the Thousand Sons, they maybe had a bit more rivalry when the Codex first came out, though the Grand Coven is easily the most played and successful now. This one's very much leading the way for the Thousand Sons in competitive play. Tournament win rates are around 54% and casual win rates pretty similar, around about 5 times the play rate versus the Rubrique Phalanx, and 5 tournament victories. This one focuses around the Thousand Sons psychic trickery and particularly magical damage dealing. They've got 3 turns worth of useful psychic shooting damage buffs, extending the range, a +1 to wound and some devastating wounds, and then back that up with some pretty powerful stratagems. Rerolling a psychic test is really big for the Thousand Sons and not something that most detachments can do. The blanket damage one is basically some extra value guaranteed there, really nice for Magnus in particular. There's a sticky objectives one which is generally good support for winning primary games, and they can flex out their psychic damage to a different detachment buff if they want to, and have a big damage reroll one for magical firepower, costing 2 CP though it's probably going to be a Magnus specific one. Then finally their enhancements are really good. The Umbrellific Crystal to teleport a unit around the board and maybe get some Warp Flamers in range. There's the Vortex of Attack which gives you a damage buff, damage 2 or an Infernal Master or a Sorcerer shooting perhaps, and an extra once per game Doom Bolt can be a big deal as well. Throwing out 5 extra mortal wounds potentially is huge. Overall between all that it's pretty great support for Magnus and Sorcerers leading Rubric squads. Beyond that, the next most popular and successful looks like the Rubrique Phalanx, some genuinely interesting enough support for Rubric Marines and Scarab Occult Terminators. The detachment rule maybe isn't the most interesting, but they do have some nice stratagems and an option to infiltrate the unit. The +1 to hit enhancement is quite good on a Scarab Occult block as well. And besides that, the Warpforged Cabal also does alright for some rerolls for Thousand Sons vehicles, focusing on a lot of things that don't tend to be the focus of the army though, and the Warp Meld Mutant detachment had a bit of a disappointingly harsh nerf. It was challenging the Grand Coven for one of the stronger detachments, though far lesser played, but taking the main keyword away from the Mutalith meant that it lost its best unit that buffs could apply to. Next up we've got the World Eaters, and for them it can only be the Berserker Warband, by far the most played in competitive games, around about 5 times or more the Khorne Demonkin now. The detachment's been used to win 9 tournaments, so the vast majority of ones that the World Eaters have managed to take, and the tournament and casual win rates are both pretty solid around the 50% mark. It does feel by far the most general purpose detachment. A +2 strength and a +1 attack on the charge is enjoyed by just about every World Eaters unit. In particular, Khorne Berserkers struggle to be effective without that, and then they've got some nice stratagems to back that up. Extra AP for 1 CP can often well be worth it. Berserkers can get advance and charge and a big surge move when they want it. You can sticky an objective on death, which is nice for some expendable spawn moving into the midboard. There's a 2 command point one for a -1 damage, which could be a big deal against the right attacks, and there's the possibility of an extra blessing if you can destroy something big to attract Khorne's favour. For enhancements, the Berserker Glaive is a nice one, a good damage boost that could help out a Demon Prince or a Slaughterbound maybe, and the Helm of Brazen Ire is also good, maybe making a Demon Prince extra hard to take down. Overall it's just really quite a general purpose detachment, great for the Berserkers and good for everything else, and perhaps gives some good draw to running a Demon Prince too. Besides that, probably the next one would be the Khorne Demonkin as the next most popular. This one did take a nerf to the crazy spawning that you could do with the Bloodletters when units got shot down. It's still really quite an interesting one, though far lesser plays, a lower tournament win rate, and just the 1 event win. Gortrak Onslaught's probably the next after that, the transport focused one that could also help Berserkers with the Lance keyword. For the last of the Deity Legions, it's the Emperor's Children, and again they have one dominant detachment. The Coterie of the Conceited is by far the most played around about 4 times its next rival in the Peerless Bladesman. Win rates are around about 47% or so, though Emperor's Children in general haven't been having the best time at the tops of the tournament tables, just the 1 event victory here, even if it was a pretty huge event. The core rule for this one is the increasing damage buff based on the units that you can slay. It could be quite quick to get 2 reroll 1s to hit army wide, and then not that far after that to get reroll 1s to wound, and then following that if you can get into the later turns you can get some enormous melee buffs too. It does have the potential for loads of buff damage, but unless the opponent's got some exposed and easy units to kill, it could be a little bit too slow to get going. For stratagems, they've got to reroll hit rolls in melee, which could be nice enough for the Lord Exultant's unit in particular. They've got an Armour of Contempt equivalent for a little more defense. forcing the foe to attack one unit, which can be a big melee move in the right situation, and one to manipulate the pledge, allowing you to cash in if you do happen to kill an extra unit that you weren't expecting. The enhancements are alright as well, and could be good for Demon Princes. Unholy Fortune can give you some dice manipulation to get some automatic 6s, and Eternal Servitude could allow a Demon Prince to revive on death, potentially coming back with a whole load more melee threat. Overall, compared with the rest, it seems to have been embraced as by far the best one to help out the strongest choices in the Emperor's Children's limited roster. Otherwise, for its next closest rival, that seems to be the Peerless Bladesman. Win rates are a lot lower though, around about the low 40s or so in terms of performance. This one has some direct melee buffs and some stratagems to help out in close combat as well. I think it would probably be better if Flawless Blades were better though. After that, it looks like it's the Allied Demon Carnival of Excess, which is played by a few but not loads. Next up, we've got the Chaos Knights, and they've got 2 detachments that stand up rather above the rest, and I still guess that both of these will be solidly powerful after the nerfs. Both of them have win rates of around about 55% or so, a similar number of tournament victories, and are pretty well even in terms of people playing them, but both standing far higher than the Houndpack Lance or the Traitorous Lance. The Lords of Dread is the Titanic support one, allowing you to mark objectives for sticky objectives at OC5 for free. Really quite powerful for dominating the primary game and allowing the big knights to go on to destroy more stuff. And then they also have some good stratagems in there as well. A -1 damage one, rerolls versus monsters and vehicles, and unrestricted ones against Titanics is pretty great. And the higher chance to explode in death one can be quite a big deal if the opponent swarms a knight. Their enhancements are absolutely next level though, literally every single one of them usable and interesting in its own way. Warpborn Stalker for warping around the board, the Zinch one to increase the cost of stratagems, a Fights First one, a Blanker Damage one, and an Advance and Charge one, all big meaningful buffs that the Titanic Knights really enjoy. The Infernal Lance on the other hand is a bit more general purpose for big knights versus small. That's the one that allows you to potentially do some Dark Pact style things to either power up your damage, defense or movement. In particular, getting lethal hits on a dual Gatling cannon despoiler turns that into a monstrous general purpose gun turret that just deletes basically everything, though these sustained hits and movement can be pretty equally impactful too. For the stratagems, this is the one that gets Diabolic Bulwark, so it can have the 4+ invulnerable save. There's an Ignore Cover one to help out with the shooting further, an Armour of Contempt in the fight phase, giving you a bit more durability there than you might otherwise have. They also have a sticky objective stratagem and have one to manipulate their core mechanic surges as well. The enhancements aren't quite as standout as the Lord of Dread, but they have a good Knight Diabolus one to help out in melee, and one that gives your shooting the assault keyword. Being able to run and gun is really quite scary with some of the firepower that the big knights can spit out. Those ones are by far the more standout ones. Houndpack Lance and Traitorous Lance have been doing alright by the numbers, just given the power of Chaos Knights in general. I guess maybe Houndpack might have gained a bit on the others after the nerfs, just given that the other War Dogs didn't go up in line with the Knights besides the Carnival. Finally for Chaos, we've got the Demons. Prior to some of the last balance updates, it seemed like it was a fairly even race between Demon Incursion and Shadow Legion. At the moment though, it looks like Demon Incursion has pulled away via the stats. The win rates are far higher than Shadow Legion at the moment, around about 55% or so, both competitive and casually. It's played a little bit more, though not loads, and has got one more event win as well, 3 versus 2. The core rule for the Incursion allows you to get some close range deep strike charges, fairly easy to achieve with the Shadow of Chaos with bubbles around the Greater Demons, which are already great units anyway, though they also have a stratagem for a 6-inch deep strike and charge anyway as well. So very hard to keep units screened, and pretty much impossible to keep some important stuff out of melee in this detachment. Besides that, they've also got a return to reserves, advance and charge within the shadow, which is nice for the greater demons, and a sticky objectives one as well. The enhancements are also another strong point here, basically all solid for their points cost in different ways. Now the greater demons basically have the Shadow of Chaos always on around them. The 4+ Feel No Pain Great Unclean one is a particularly intimidating strong one. Extra melee for the Bloodthirster and extra damage for the Lord of Change are both nice too. Otherwise, the next rival is likely the Shadow Legion. For tournament win rates, it does seem to have dropped quite a bit though, more sort of 44%ish, even if it seems to be doing alright in casual games still. Played in similar kind of numbers, and does still have 2 event victories. That's the one with the deity-specific buffs for datasheets, and allows you to ally in some Chaos Space Marines, which can be pretty interesting to cover certain niches. You can get some cultists for some cheap sticky objectives, and a whole bunch of other interesting stuff. All the rest seem to be far more niche appeal, though seem to be doing at least alright by the win rates and numbers. Blood Legion seems to be doing okay for more casual games, though both the Plague Legion and the Scintillating Legion seem to have some interest for competitive play. People have managed to win some tournaments with both of those and their win rates seem okay. Looks like it is possible to make those work if you want to. Finally moving on to the Xenos, and starting out we've got the Aeldari. Again, there seem to be another army that have 2 detachments on at least a fairly even level. It's the Aspect Host and the War Host that seem to get played the most at the moment, both with pretty solid win rates around about the 50% or so sort of mark, and both with a solid amount of tournament victories, though it does look like the Aspect Host has got quite a few more than the War Host so far. Both of them tend to revolve around a lot of the same units. The Aspect Warriors and their Phoenix Lords are really good at the moment. Obviously they're going to be a major factor in the Aspect Host list, where most of the stratagems and buffs are locked to them, but they make up the majority of War Host lists as well. They just tend to be a little bit more varied with other support. For the Aspect Host core rules, they get some inbuilt damage rerolls for all Aspect Warriors and Phoenix Lords and the Avatar if you bring one. And then stratagems for return to a Wave Serpent transport to potentially keep a very dangerous unit safe from fire, a strong range damage buff one which could be nasty for Dark Reapers or Fire Dragons, a fight on death on a 4+, or very nice for Howling Banshees or Phoenix Lords potentially, as an ignore modifiers one. The enhancements maybe tend to be a bit on the niche side, particularly for lists that go very heavy on the Phoenix Lords. The -1 to wound one seems okay for the points cost, and the +1 damage and precision could be alright for a fighty Autarch maybe. Neither of them seems essential though. For the War Host, that's the one that doubles down on the battle focus movement shenanigans, getting you 1 more of those, and then a 1-inch movement boost to the ones that do go off. Their stratagems have a fire and fade, again helpful for keeping fragile Aspect Warriors safe while damaging. The same re-embark stratagem to jump into a Wave Serpent, a return to reserves near a board edge, which is usually helpful to have for making units threatening and doing secondaries. They also have their own range damage buff with some sustained hits, and some standard Aeldari tricks with a -1 to hit and a fallback shoot and charge. Some of their enhancements are also interesting, an extra battle focus one which could be handy to have on the board, a Phoenix Gem to have a chance to res a character, and a free command point reroll one. After those, it seems that the Seer Council is the next most popular and successful. It's just a lot more niche though and doesn't seem to be doing quite as well as per the numbers. Win rate's more like around 46%, though at least someone's managed to get 1 tournament victory with it. For the Dark Kin, I'd rate the Drukhari's winning detachment as the Reaper's Wager, though the Sky Splinter Assault coming in at a fairly close second. Reaper's Wager is easily the most played though, around about 3 times the play rate versus Sky Splinter in more competitive games. It's got a tournament win rate of 52% versus the 50 of the Sky Splinter, and 2 event victories versus 1. Despite it in theory being the allied Harlequin detachment, it works pretty well even with no Harlequins in it, though plenty of people do take maybe 1 or 2 token units. The core rule just gives you reroll ones to hit against everything, and while your part of the army is losing the wager, then you get 2 reroll ones to wound as well. And then the stratagems are really quite good ones throughout, helping Drukhari get in range to damage things like an advance and charge, a deny overwatch one, and then potentially hit harder when they get there. There's a sustained or lethal hit stratagem, one for a fight on death, and a -1 to hit in melee, which might be a little bit more situational. They also have access to a reactive move too, which is rarely a bad thing for any army, particularly one with fragile infantry units that want to be kept safe either behind terrain or in transports. There's an enhancement that can allow you to infiltrate some Harlequins if you'd like to, and one that can manipulate the detachment rule, though maybe the single best one might be the Scout's 9 inches one, allowing a unit in a transport to get into an incredibly aggressive staging position right from the word go. Between all that, it feels like it supports the Drukhari army in general pretty well, maybe being particularly helpful for their melee. Sky Splinter Assault is also really playable and not so far behind though. That's the one that can get you some big damage out of transports with ignores cover or lance keyword things. Lots of stratagems to manipulate and play around with the common transports, with raiders and venoms being the usual way to get into battle. And they can do that particularly long and scary charge move with an Archon and some Incubi, or Lilith Hesperax and a bunch of witches, getting the sort of Land Raider assault ramp style rules. Sky Splinter is chosen far less than Reaper's Wager, and Real Space Raiders is really quite niche, though it seems to be doing okay for the few people trying it out. For the Tyranids, as with the Dark Angels, it seems to be their new detachment, the Subterranean Assault, that is making the most waves below the ground at the moment. It's got the best win rate out of the Tyranid detachments at over 50% compared with the faction average, which is more like 46 or so. Has won the only 2 grand tournaments that Tyranids have prevailed at since the last balance update, and has a similar sort of play rate to Invasion Fleet, which also has a lot of value, and I feel like will have a lot more draw to it given that you don't need very specific models to make it work. The core rule gives your burrower units the ability to create tunnels, and then Tyranids can emerge from those tunnels for some very close 6-inch charges. It makes it the easiest attachment for Tyranid units to get into melee really quite easily. On top of that, they just have an army-wide reroll ones to hit, which is kind of surprising. So compared with the vast majority of detachments, Tyranids are just that bit more dangerous here. Then they've got some good movement and reserve stratagems. You can flip units from one tunnel marker to next to another, return to reserves, and there's a nice damage buff one for arriving units. Most of the enhancements are really quite usable. Maybe the Trigon Prime one is particularly standout, giving you a super fighty Trigon with the Synapse keyword. The army list is going to have to build itself around a few borrowers to create those markers, maybe some Trigons and some Raveners perhaps, and then might go heavier on close range melee threats compared with other Tyranid armies, as it's really quite easy to get them into the fight. Beyond that, the other biggest rival is Invasion Fleet. As mentioned, pretty much equally well played. It seems to be doing a bit worse in terms of tournament win rates though, and doesn't seem to have won any events recently. It's good at supporting pretty much the whole Tyranid roster though. Army-wide damage buffs from the core rule against your choice of keywords. You can regenerate the endless multitudes in a really big way. There's a feel no pain stratagem that can make your warriors far harder to kill each turn, and a good feel no pain enhancement as well, and a stratagem to flex those hyper adaptations if it makes sense to. Beyond that though, Tyranids have generally been at least fairly well balanced for detachment rules recently. The Vanguard Onslaught can support the Invaders and Genestealer as well. Crusher Stampede can do well for Monster Mash Tyranids, and Assimilation Swarm can be good for a good bit of healing from the Harvester units. All these seem to be far more niche and lesser played at tournaments at the moment, though people using them seem to be doing fairly similarly well to the Invasion Fleet. Next up, we've got the Genestealer Cults. It seemed that previously there was a lot of love for basically most of their detachments, and Final Day doing quite well as well. Though recently it seems like the Host of Ascension has come to the fore. That one seems to have been winning all the tournaments for them and doing far better than the rest. And for the small amount of people taking Genestealer Cults to grand tournaments, that's just enormously more popular as well, around about 4 times the next competitor. In terms of tournament stats, it looks like it could be one of the strongest attachments in 40k right now, at least on paper. Tournament win rates are around about 60% or so, and doing well casually too. And then a pretty enormous 7 event victories, which is pretty massively excessive compared with the amount of people playing it. This one's the one that builds around reserve shenanigans and big damage boosts from reserves. Units that arrive from reserves get sustained hits and ignores cover on the turn in which they do so, and that makes it particularly good for shooting threats, in particular neophyte hybrids with characters attached, so they can hit extra hard when they turn up. The other stratagems support that well as well. There's 2 big damage dealer stratagems and 2 good damage dealer enhancements too. There's a good one to return to reserves when shot, which means that your neophytes could just be phasing off the board all ready for a next target. And there's a stratagem for deep striking close as well, potentially allowing them to get lines of sight on other things that might have been screened. They've also got a nice stratagem for a +2 to charge as well, which could be a really good one for easily delivering melee. Overall, between all that, it makes for a very strong detachment with a lot of options, stuff that could be useful enough to most of the units in the codex, though definitely favours building around a big scary block of central neophyte damage dealers. Besides that, most of the rest see some interest in play. There's not loads of recent data on them, given that the detachment seems to be rather dominated by the Host of Ascension, and there's just not that many people that played Genestealer Cults in the first place. Biosantic Broodsurge seems to be the next most played, with casual win rates doing okay, though a bit less so in competitive games. Final Day and Outlander Claw have generally done pretty well in the past though. Next up, for the Force of the Greater Good in the Tau Empire, they've generally had pretty solid balance between their detachments since their codex came out. Literally all 6 of their detachments, including the Kroot Hunting Pack, get a solid amount of play in grand tournaments, though maybe Montcar and Cao Yon a bit ahead of the rest in terms of interest and success. Out of those 2, have had to give a victory to one of them by the stats, that'd probably be Cao Yon. It's got these slightly better tournament win rates, and it's got 3 event victories where Montcar doesn't have any yet, despite Montcar being the slightly more played one. Cao Yon has its sustained hits damage boost from turn 3 onwards, some pretty good damage dealer strats, the Wall of Mirrors to return stealth suits and ghost kills to reserve, and combat invocation could potentially help out some breaches from time to time. The sustained hits and maybe ignores modifiers are really quite big damage boosts though, and potentially can mean that if you can play cagey and keep a good amount of your force surviving until the later turns, the Tau can suddenly go into big damage mode after that. Montcar can give lethal hits on the assault keyword in the early game, really quite nice for mid-strength Tau profiles being able to hit enemies hard, and I've got an automatic 6-inch advanced stratagem, one to mark a unit for some big rerolls after it slew one of yours, a damage boost for breachers after they get out of a devilfish, and boosting AP against one nominated target. It does seem to be the single most popular out of the Tau detachment, pretty hard to go wrong with extra damage and extra movement. Otherwise, all the rest seem to be doing at least okay though, mostly with win rates between the lower mid-40s. Interestingly enough, it seems like the Kroot Hunting Pack is having the most on-paper success, even if not many people play it. Looks like some people have managed to take a couple of event wins with that one. Retaliation has some good win rates as well, and the Experimental Prototype Cadre has got some pretty bad win rates, though someone has managed to win a tournament with it. Despite good detachment balance, the Tau in general don't seem to be having particularly great success with win rates and things though, particularly in more casual play versus competitive. Next up, we've got the newest codex to hit Warhammer 40k in the Leagues of Votann. As it's a recent codex release, it's maybe a little bit less clear as to what will stand on top. Official points have not really been too long released at time of recording, so we don't really have any tournament data. From the new codex though, it feels like most people seem to be drawn to either the Needguard Oathband or the Brandfast Oathband as ones they think might be strong. I think if I had to guess myself, I'd probably go for the Needguard one. That's the one that farms yield points based on enemies slain, and then otherwise has the powerful stratagems ported over from the index, though maybe with a few more limitations on them compared with what they were. There's a sustained hit shooting one, better AP in melee, worsening AP against your units, fallback shoot and charge, return fire, which can be quite nice with a land fortress, and quite a nice cheap and effective one with reroll ones to hit and wound when shooting. They're all quite powerful, but to either access the most powerful versions of them or to use them entirely, you might already need to have quite a lot of yield points. Some of the enhancements seem quite good as well, generating a yield point if you don't spend any in a turn, and there's one way you can sacrifice 3 yield points for a +1 to wound for the bearers led units. That could be a good one on a big central damage dealer unit. Otherwise, the other one that seems tempting is the Brandfast Oathband. That's the transport focused one, and basically all the leagues of Votann vehicles bar 1 are transports right now. They give sustained hits 1 to infantry shooting nearby, and infantry firepower seems like one of the best damage dealers with the Brockir Thunderkin currently. They've got plenty of stratagems for supporting their vehicles, things like moving through terrain, returning fire if infantry nearby are shot, reactive moves to enemy shooting, and the Hecaton Land Fortress potentially smashing through some terrain to get where it needs to go. The enhancement for sustained hits 2 as well is a pretty big deal, and that could be fairly awesome with the Brockir Thunderkin getting sustained hits on a 4+. For 5 points, the Ironmaster Repair one seems quite nice as well, if that helps power some wounds back on land fortresses over the game. Overall, will certainly be interesting to see how they fare, if these ones do wind up being some of the stronger ones, and if any other builds emerge. For the Necrons, again they're an army that's got 2 detachments that are pretty even in terms of play rate and power, and those are the Starshatter Arsenal and the Awakened Dynasty. Both of those have played a fairly even amount, and at least have fairly similar win rates around the 50% kind of mark, the Starshatter's win rates seeming to be very slightly higher, but the Awakened Dynasty has won a few more tournaments. For Starshatter, this is the one that gives you a +1 to hit against units on objectives, pretty powerful as a buff army-wide, and then non-Titanic vehicles and mounted units gain the assault keyword. The stratagems are fairly powerful as well. A reanimate at the end of the fight phase can be good to stat reanimation combos high. You can move through terrain, which could be good for the Silent King. There's faster advances and movement after being shot, a -1 to wound for 2 CP, which is big on Zarek himself once again, and another pricey 2 command point 1 for a +1 to wound against things on objectives. For enhancements, maybe some of the more standout ones are reroll ones to hit and wound in an aura around 1 noble. That's nice on a Catacomb command barge to make a sort of mini Silent King. It's not too uncommon to see a Hexmark Destroyer bearing a -1 damage enhancement to put on Zarek and make him just unreasonably tough and hard to take down. Overall, this one's pretty great for the Silent King and Doomsday arcs, but pretty good for other things besides as well. The Awakened Dynasty, on the other hand, is the index one that revolves around characters, giving you a +1 to hit for lead units, so you want plenty of those, and they're good stratagems that often get better for those lead units. A reactive reanimation one, which again is really nice with things like an Orokin blob of warriors. If a character gets sniped or shot down, then you can get him back up for 1 command point. That could be nice for Luminor Zeraz as well. They've got ones that buff shooting and melee damage, a return fire one, and one for the assault keyword. Perhaps for their most standout enhancements, there's a 4+ Feel No Pain one, which could be good on either a Catacomb command barge or a Scorpec Lord to make them super hard to kill, and the Veil of Darkness to allow 1 unit to warp across the board, potentially getting a big alpha strike or getting somewhere helpful for objectives. The Necrons do have some powerful leader combos, various ones that you can build around the troops. Scorpex with Lords are quite nice, as are Wraiths with Technomancers, and still not every unit needs to have a leader. Beyond those, now in 3rd place it seems, is the Hypercrypt Legion, still doing acceptably with win rates that are around the 45% kind of mark. In competitive play though, it's only played around 1/5 the amount of the previous 2, though it has some fairly godly movement shenanigans moving around the board, and pretty good support for monoliths as well. Finally, we have the Greenskins, and here we have the ever-reliable Warhorde doing well. That one's far more played than any of the rest, around about 4 times the next most played, which is Dreadmob, though its performance stats kind of underline why Orks are struggling so much at the moment. Despite being in theory the best detachment, it's only got a tournament win rate of around 44% or so, maybe mildly better in casual play, and just the 1 tournament victory. It is a pretty powerful detachment for supporting any flavours of Greenskin melee that you might have. You get sustained hits in melee, so a flat damage buff there. And then I would rate the stratagems as really quite nice. There's a -1 to wound 1 for some flexible durability, a +2 to advance and charge, which can be a really big deal for getting Orks across the board, particularly in the war. You can flex into a bit more melee damage with sustained hits on a 5+, a Kareen 1 if a vehicle explodes, and fights on death. Some of the enhancements are pretty solid as well. The sideboard body for a Feel No Pain, the Kill Chopper being quite a nice melee buff, and the plus 2-inch move one can be quite good for a footbound war boss. In general, it's going to reward various flavours of melee orcs, usually jumping out of transports of one sort or another these days. Beyond the Warhorde, there isn't that much data for most of the rest of them, though all of them do have some draw and some strength. Dread Mob seems to be the next most played, maybe partly for fun factor. It's usually tended to be quite popular with its big damage buffs, though not usually had much success at either a casual or competitive level. Cult of Speed and Tactical Brigade have also had a GT win. Both of those also have quite good tournament win rates at the moment. A bit better than Warhorde, but in general it looks like they're far lesser played, and not many people have much faith that they're going to win the day for the Orks. Green Tide seems to have alright casual win rates, being able to flood the board with hordes of boys and dominate on primary for a bit, and both Bully Boys and Big Hunt also have some players as well, maybe win rates around about the lower 40s. Overall though, feels like Orks as a faction do need some help. Hopefully Games Workshop will give them a bit of a power boost in the next balance update. That's each faction in Warhammer 40k talked about, though to round up, here's just a few of the most powerful detachments, this one just based on tournament win rates alone, at least going by the ones that are played a significant amount, so it's a bit more likely that you can rely on the numbers for. Despite the Death Guard and Imperial Knights ruling the roost in terms of most of the results, it still seems like the Genestealer Cult Host of Ascension has the single best win rate of any detachment, a small number of players doing very well for the Four-Armed Emperor. I guess we'll see the popular Death Guard and Knight ones drop at least somewhat after the nerfs. It remains to be seen just how much though. Otherwise, for some of the strongest attachments in 40k, it looks like it's Demon Incursion for the Chaos Demons, Angelic Inheritors for the Blood Angels, Grand Coven for the Thousand Sons, both the popular Sisters detachments and Renegade Raiders for the Chaos Space Marines, and then lots and lots of other stuff really not too far behind those. It does make me wonder whether or not Genestealer Cults are another army that's going to be taking some flack in a future balance pass. In any case though, let me know what you make of some of the strongest attachments in Warhammer 40k for each faction, which ones would you rate for your army and why. That's it for this one, though for the end of the video I'll just cycle back to the sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold. If you did happen to want to pick up a magnetic carry case, there'll be links below if you want to check them out, and I've got a code for 25% off with AT25. For their cases, they're generally set up with miniatures arrayed on these steel trays. Here's how many you can fit on them when fully loaded, around about 90 odd 25mm bases or 6 knight armigers if you cram them all in, and then the different trays have different levels with different heights of them. The small one is the Mag Case Mini. This one's £72 or $75 with the code. That's including shipping but might be exclusive of VAT or import duties. Even the small one's got a fair amount of miniatures that you can fit in it though, as you can see by the tanks on the ground floor and the Terminators on the top one. Then they've got their more standard mag case. This one's around £114 or $120 with the code. This one's a fair bit taller, as you can see by the Chaos Knight on the ground floor of this one. Should be big enough for a lot of more normal sized 40k armies. I'll leave the dimensions for the boxes here on the screen, and they all come with a supply of magnets to mount to the undersides of bases. Finally, they have the really big one with the XL mag case. This one could be big enough to transport some entire collections. Plenty of room in this one, as you can see with the Baneblade on the top left. Finally, they do also have an MDF terrain offering as well as their competitive terrain set. You can get that separately if it's something that we're interested in, though it does come at a discount if you pick up a mag case. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one though. You can check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their things. That's it for this one. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming just about every day. If you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.